Our investment up front in education is the most important investment that we can make for the rest of our life.
We know what to do to hold down property taxes without hurting kids' schools. There's a bunch of laws written over the years about how we pay for the education of our kids. The idea was to protect taxpayers and also to make it easier for communities that didn't have a lot of money to give their kids a good education. But if you ask virtually everyone, the laws aren't working.
Funding and education. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the CMC Show, Candid Melanin Conversations. We discuss sports and entertainment, hot topics. I'm your host, Anthony Stewart, along with my two co-hosts, David Singh and Aaron Pharr. As you can see from the intro video, we have a hot topic for you today. How you guys doing?
Hey, we're doing good. Thanks for asking.
Dave, I'm gonna throw this to you first. Funding and education. When you hear that, what comes to mind?
Well, what comes to mind is school districts are all over the country having adequate funding to provide the necessary resources for their students that are enrolled to get a quality education. And right now, unfortunately, the circumstance arises where, for whatever reason, there's a lack of enrollment in schools. And the federal government sees that that lack of enrollment will cause a lack of funding going towards the Department of Education. And it's across the board, unfortunately, for the fact that teachers aren't making what they are valued to be making, working the number of hours they work and the time and the dedication and the expenses out of their own pockets to make sure their children or their students are being taught adequately. And it's kind of hard to keep that morale up when you keep losing funding from the federal government for whatever reason because of low attendance or low enrollment or money being spent in districts where it should not have been spent and prioritized differently, to where now many districts are having executors from the Texas Department of Education overseeing their budgets just to see where these monies are going, because many districts are 10, 15, $18 million in the hole, but they're still needing more money to be able to meet their payrolls, to be able to meet the expenses of food for their kids' meals, to be able to handle expenses for different resources such as textbooks, dry erase boards, all types of things that kids need in the classroom to be successful. The money is no longer available as it used to be. And unfortunately, it's because of declining enrollment. So I guess the question I have is, if enrollment in public schools are declining, where are these kids going? Because charter schools as well depend on government funding to run adequately, and they are as well suffering from the funding that they're not getting that they should get. So for whatever reason, the federal government feels that money that is needed for the Department of Education or education period is better used somewhere else, and the education of students throughout the United States is kind of put on the back burner.
What's your sense, Aaron? Before I bring you in, let me follow up with David though. What's your sense of when this actually started, or can you pinpoint?
Well, I've been teaching as a certified teacher for over 20 years, and even 10, 15 years ago, you would have students that didn't meet the criteria for passing that grade level, but would still be passed on to the next grade level. And it's just like a bunch of other kids who were in the same circumstance. They either didn't want to do their work or they didn't know how to do their work, but they were used to the pattern of being passed on anyway. And that's the pattern that the federal government relies upon when it comes to funding to the Department of Education. The more seats of new students coming into a district, the more money that district will get. The less students that are enrolled in that district, the less money that district gets. And there has to be a balance, yes, but it needs to be dealt with better than just cutting off funding from the Department of Education and putting that money elsewhere, when our kids in the classrooms from kindergarten all the way through the 12th grade are suffering from one reason or another.
My mind was going to rhetoric in the country about public schools that creates this sensation, if you will, to cut public funding. And it becomes a political thing, Democrat versus Republican. But Aaron, what do you think?
I mean, I just, just being in schools, like you guys for over 20 years, and then also being a product, of public schools. We were all a product of public schools, and we can look back at our own upbringing, and we can see that our schools lacked things that we needed. But I just think that if you look at our schools then and schools now, first of all, our schools had more representation of us in schools, and so I think you had more structure and discipline when we were growing up. Now
When you
that
say representation, you mean like from faculty,
I mean, like from a
administration?
faculty standpoint, from a male standpoint,
Yeah,
you have more males that were teachers back then when we were growing up,
yeah.
and then from a faculty standpoint, we grew up in the schools that the teachers that were teaching us were in our neighborhood who lived in our community. But also, Dave brought up with the funds and the money is that after schools were desegregated, money was taken out of was taken from our communities, was taken from our schools
I was going
to
to get to that.
build new schools, to build money to go to private schools, and so now you're talking about a pie that's getting split up. And of course, schools that are in better economic areas, schools that serve a little bit higher class community, they're going to get everything first before the lower schools. And that's just anything like here in America, that's just the way that the ball rolls down. So now that we're dealing with this shortage of funds, then now you have to say, okay, well, how are we going to be able to do what we need to do and have the money to do it?
So, is there a real shortage of funds, or is it just redirected?
I think it's a little bit of both.
It is,
I think it's both.
and primarily, it's a double-edged sword because most of the time, any district anywhere is going to rely upon bonds and taxes from their community to continue to operate in the black. And so, again, I used earlier as an example when we had our discussion before the show, here in El Paso, the Socorro Independent School District is having to borrow $24 million to pay their teachers and staff by the end of December. And, you have to ask yourself, okay, where is this money going that they don't have enough to pay their teachers and staff that they got to borrow money to pay them by the end of this school year or end of
How
this.
big is that district in El Paso, Dave?
It's one of the biggest ones. It wasn't big at first, but
uh,
it grew overnight, and it turned out to be one of the biggest ones here. And the funding that they got because it grew so fast, they built a brand new sports complex. They built new schools, okay. But then COVID hit, and enrollment went down, and did not recover after COVID. But at the same time, we still had the same number of teachers, they had the same number of staff members, and the same maintenance expenditures that came up that they had to meet. But they weren't getting that same amount of money from the government for the kids that were enrolled in school. So now they're having to borrow money, and they have a conservator from Texas Education Agency overseeing everything. And he mentioned on a newscast earlier saying, this has been the first time this has happened to this district in 20 years. Well, if you're allocating your money correctly and putting it where it's supposed to be going, you really shouldn't need to borrow money to pay your staff. I mean, all that should be taken care of and accounted for. But for whatever reason, I guess things happen, and you have to take money from one source to pay another source that's more expedient, and then hope to get that money back for the source you initially had planned it for. And that's what you're seeing mostly with many schools and districts, not only in Texas, but throughout the country. Now, I'll add one more point to that. it has now gotten critical to where Houston, for example, there is a coach who has now been indicted for helping other people get teaching certificates that are not valid. And these people were in the classroom teaching and really not qualified to teach that subject, much
Yeah, I
less
read that
help these
story. I seen
kids.
that
You
story.
know, it's really way out of proportion, but that's how bad it has gotten. So now, not only is the federal government looking at the number of enrollments these districts throughout the countries have, they've got another magnifying glass on certain districts just to see what teachers are legally certified to teach in those classes.
So tell me about this story. I didn't see that.
It was a high school coach in Houston that Houston's got a real bad shortage of teachers,
Okay.
and their alternative certification programs you got to qualify for, have a degree,
Right.
have so many certain hours to even be enrolled. But somehow they were getting these people certifications to teach through what avenue?
Without the
I don't know.
credentials.
But they were getting them credentials, and when you call Texas Education Agency and say, "Hey, I'm looking at this person's certification, and there's no record of it, but they got a document saying that they're
Wow.
certified," that was a problem. I don't know, there were several people indicted, besides the spearhead of the situation.
Yeah.
So that is another wrench thrown into the education funding because of the fraudulent activities like that.
Exactly. And then that's going to, just like you said, Dave, that's in Houston, which was dealing with public schools, which is dealing with primarily minority students. So now those schools and those students are going to be hurt, and there's going to be a question of, do we send them funds because these people are going to be embezzling funds? I mean, that was over 200 teachers they said that could eventually get indicted from that. I read that story, and so once again, that's not going to help the situation as far as funding goes. When we have rogue stuff like that going on, it's going to make things look even worse.
While you guys were talking, I was going to try to pull up some stats about the federal government funding. Are they mainly cutting the disadvantaged or the minority, and are the white districts still getting their funding?
Well, I mean, right now, just reading about what you just said, where the funding is and what it is, they said programs that are provided to K through 12 schools throughout the nation is $28 billion a year, but federal funding roughly accounts for about 10% of the school funding because the rest comes from state and local taxes. That said, schools do receive additional federal funding. And for the past 4 years, to help them recover from COVID-19. The Department of Education also distributes about $30 billion a year to low-income college students via Pell Grant programs and manages the $1.6 trillion student loan portfolio. So, we're talking about a lot of money.
We are. This brought me to Vegas or Nevada, where you and I are, Aaron. So when they legalized marijuana out here, a part of that money was earmarked for education,
Yes,
right?
it was.
So check this out. The first year it brought in how much? I think it was $75 million. First year. The governor at that time decided, hey, we need a rainy day fund. We're going to hold this money
Right.
for a rainy day. So we're like, what's the rainy day? Right? This money was already earmarked for
For
education.
education. Yeah.
They have not even given any of that money. That's the first year. How long has it's been legalized now?
It's been over 4 years.
So if it's 100 million rounding up,
Right.
or it's, you know what I'm saying? If it's 100 million every year
Yeah, almost $500 million.
right now, that's not going to education. So that takes me back to federal government, like you read, it doesn't fund all of education. A lot of it is on the state and local taxes. And I believe, especially out here, they have money. They have it by that one avenue or that one route of the earmarked money from the sale of marijuana out here. They're just not giving it to education.
So many of you at home keep asking Fox 5, if our schools need the funding, where's all the marijuana money? Where's that money going? Well, a bill just introduced would break down that money trail for you to see.
What happened to when we legalized marijuana and seeing actually where this money goes? Because it's not to the schools or the teachers. They should ask the state where all the marijuana money is.
Fox 5 gets plenty of calls in our rant line asking, show me the money, or where the marijuana tax money's going. Nevadans supported legalizing marijuana. They wanted the additional money to go into education. And the fact that this has been multiple years since this was passed and people still have those worries. Democrats are sending almost $2.2 billion of additional funding to education this year. So with the increased funding, of course, we need increased accountability. Assemblywoman Brittany Miller of Clark County just introduced a bill that would create the Financial Oversight of School Spending Committee. If the bill passes, every quarter, the committee would produce a financial report that every Nevadan can see.
Yeah. I mean, we've seen a whole bunch of, movies and programs that have shown, people being crooked, and putting their fingers in a cookie jar and, robbing Peter to pay Paul and all those things. So there has to be more than just what we see
Right.
being in the district and working with kids, that there has to be something else. Like, why won't they give the funds for education when the funds are there?
Right.
And it's not coming down because the trickle down is not getting there. So what is the real goal here? I mean, like, what is really going on? Why do they don't want to give the funds?
Let me throw this in
Sounds
here.
like they're collecting interest on that money.
Exactly.
Right, I know, but okay, they're collecting interest, but once again, for money that's going where?
Right.
I mean, like, who's getting the money? Yeah, exactly. So that makes me just think of a bigger thing. Now, are we just talking about the Department of Education not wanting to fund and take care of schools, especially lower performing, lower economic schools and communities that need it? Or is there a bigger thing?
And that bigger thing could be, hey, Nevada, you said that this tax was going to go for your district. We see you got $500 million that you haven't dispersed. We're not going to give you any more money. It could be that. Let me give you an anecdote. At the school that I'm teaching at right now, this is I think it's my fifth school. Every year, special education teachers, there is a fund. Every teacher gets about $1,200 to spend for their class. Books, furniture, programs, whatever. This particular school, one administrator said, well, we don't know about that. Then she came back and said, well, only high school get that, not elementary and middle school. And I said, well, that's funny. I said, I've taught elementary, middle, and high school, and I've gotten it at every school. And you're saying that you don't get it. My point is, there are nefarious things going on. And to that bigger picture that you were talking about, Aaron, there are a lot of people that are doing things that are not right. She tried to tell me that we didn't get the money when I knew, this is my 10th year, when I knew that we did. Finally, they decided to go ahead and release the money. There's another thing that I heard as far as administrators. If they can show that they're not spending or they're saving some money, they get bonuses. If that's the case for administrators, then for the higher ups are certainly getting bonuses. And that's the money that should be trickling down. So to me, it's just nefarious, and it's sad because who suffers?
The kids.
The kids.
Always.
Yeah.
And I think because of that is a reason why the federal government's being such a stickler about what money they allow.
Mm-hmm.
You look at another example similar to that is Governor Greg Abbott here in Texas is trying to give people the option of going to private school and the state fund it or fund $8,000 towards it. Now, okay, great. There's a lot of people that can't afford the balance of what private schools would cost after the $8,000 was paid.
Right.
But it just goes to show you that even our politicians are trying to find ways to take funding away from the public school system. And they're probably getting kickbacks, which is the whole reason why people make these decisions that they make,
Yeah.
even though it's not beneficial to the ones that really need the funding and the resources.
Yeah. Yeah. It costs what, on average, a private school, maybe $5,000 a month?
It
Yeah.
depends if that much, but
Yeah.
people in Texas are saying Greg Abbott's just giving his millionaire friends an $8,000 discount on their tuition because they're the only ones that can really afford to take advantage of that. Anybody else in a lower socioeconomical situation, yeah, you're giving them $8,000 to send your child to private school, but where's the rest of that money coming from to pay that tuition that's going to be
Right.
ongoing?
Right. So yeah,
So
it's a problem, man. Funding is in education is a problem. I just think that it's not all on the federal government because they'll look and see what are you doing with the money, and if it's not what they think, not saying that they're right, because God knows we know they're not right all the time. But if it's not what they think that the state should be doing, they're gonna hold now. Trump, I don't know if he's really gonna be a stickler on that. I can imagine that he will because he's Republican and they are definitely anti public school.
Yeah, well, I was just looking at, just while we were talking, just doing a little research here. The Department of Public Education was created in 1979 by Jimmy Carter. That was what that was something he ran on, and that was something he did. And the funding and everything by the time Reagan left office in '88, he was funding it in half of what Jimmy Carter was doing to start in '79. You know, but and then
Not,
that
not,
goes
not even
back to
not even from 79 to 88,
exactly,
10 years later.
and exactly, and then that goes back to he already had a history of doing this when he was the governor of California. You know, in 1969, he actually made it to where colleges before that time, the UCLA's, the USC's, the state colleges at that time, they were almost free.
Right.
And because of all of the anti-war and everything, the socioeconomic stuff that was going on in the 60s, he said, look, we can't have these people going to these colleges and mixing and then creating this subculture. And one of the ways was to do it was to make private and public different. The same things that we see now in Texas. You have these outstanding, great private schools, and then you have these public schools that are struggling. And these private schools are picking the best of the best from the public schools and having them come to school there. And then we're leaving the rest just to fend for themselves. So I just think that all of this is bigger than what we're just talking about as far as the funding level goes. I just think that it's the continuance of the dumbing down of our culture and dumbing down what is going on, because when did education become a bad thing in just our community? I mean, like, that was something you strive for, getting an education, going to college, and everything. And now in our community is, oh, we hate school. We don't want to go to school. Who needs a college degree for what? They've dumbed down education to make it seem like it's a bad thing, even to the point of it's bad to be a teacher. Like, why would you want to go be a teacher? That's dumb.
Yeah.
Why would you want to do that? So it just seems like all of these things are all working together. I wonder what you brothers think.
it has its pros and its cons, and I think the main con is when the money's not there, whether it be from the state, the government, teachers have to have a way to stay motivated. And one of those ways to stay motivated is to compensate them fairly. Stu, you're right. In Texas, we get a separate stipend as a special education teacher. And it varies from district to district. But it's still not anywhere where it should be for the amount of work that you do as a special education teacher. Because everybody that's in special education knows you're not only teaching the student, you're teaching the other teacher that's working with that student, and you're probably teaching the parent too of that student, because that student is needing help from everywhere, but you're the spearhead of making sure that child is well-rounded, not just in school, but as well as out of school. So with that being said, you're looking at your situation as a teacher. You come to work every day, And then you hear, okay, well, we're cutting back in funding. We're not going to be able to do this program. We're not going to be able to do that program. Oh, and by the way, that attendance incentive we promised y'all, that's gone too. So, it goes back to keeping teachers motivated to want to be there every day, sometimes many hours of the day, and sometimes teaching kids who are so unruly, you just want to kick them out the door. But it still has to be done. The job still has to be done. And the funding should at some point be to where teachers can feel comfortable about what they're making. The districts can feel secure about having the necessary resources they need for these kids to be successful. And most importantly, the federal government can feel comfortable with where their money is going in addition to the funding the districts get to begin with.
So this is going to lead me to politics. I think there's slightly more Republican governors than there are Democratic governors in the country. And most of the funding is from the state. And we need to not just concentrate on the presidential election. We need to concentrate more, I think, on the midterm elections, because that's where the rubber meets the road. The governor, your state senators and your state congressmen, your local officials. Those are the ones that make the decisions that impact us immediately. And you keep hearing the other side, meaning the Republican side, well, we're going to leave that up to the states. We're going to let states decide this. We're going to let states decide that. So my thing is, why don't we say, us as black people say, okay, then let's go that route. That's the game that they want to play. Then let's go that route. Then let's concentrate a lot of our efforts on the midterm elections, and let's put the people in there that are looking out for our interests, that will earmark and keep their promises on those earmarks. You don't need people in there that's going to make promises like they always do, and then they skip town on their promises after that.
Yeah, I mean that's the key right there. That comes down once again from the dumbing down of all of us, because we've all been a victim of that. To when the midterm elections come, we don't even pay attention to them.
No.
And that's a couple of reasons why. One, it's not something that's in your face all the time like the presidential election is.
Right.
So you don't get all this literature. You're not getting all this stuff out saying vote, 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 vote. We got school board members that are probably members of the school board with less than 3,000 votes.
Right.
And they're members of the board. We got council members that are councilmen and less than 20,000 votes. You got a mayor that's a mayor with less than 30,000 votes. And so I've always said that, media should focus on local stuff, especially now in this digital age that we have right now. Like, what are you telling me about a presidential election at 11 o'clock at night? I already got that news.
Yeah.
I've already heard all that. I need to hear what's going on locally so I know what's affecting me on a local level. So once again, we're just talking about bigger things because it just seems so simple.
Yeah. No, as far as not being bombarded with literature and media about the midterms, I personally kind of blame our so-called leaders. I don't even know if we have any black leaders now anymore, but I think they understand. I understand that the midterm election is probably more important than the presidential election.
Yeah.
But for whatever reason, and we can get into that another day, but for whatever reason, they're not blowing that horn during the midterm elections the way they do during the presidential election. And for me, I kind of understand it in a sense, but on the other hand, I don't. But
know that, the bigger the city, I think the more they promote the midterm elections. To San Antonio, they definitely promoted it quite heavily. And every time they come around for the mayor's race, they promote it. Well, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but fortunately, some of the mayors we've had in San Antonio have gone 2, 3, and 4 terms. So, in some cases, when those midterms come along, people are like, well, he's going to win anyway, so, I'm just going to go ahead and vote and get out the way. So yeah, there's not as much notoriety for midterm elections because of the fact they're local. You know, you're going to be seeing these campaign slogans locally, maybe some regionally, but that's about it. Governor the same way. You're going to see it statewide, but beyond that, you won't see any other advertisement outside the state.
Yeah. But again, what I'm trying to say, and maybe I didn't say it eloquently the first time, it's the governor and your state representatives. Those are the ones that make the decisions for the state and how monies are really allocated.
And you're absolutely correct. But just like Dave was just saying, you know, as far as not getting that and not having those people pounding, you know, the dirt for the local elections, for the midterm elections, well, hey, I'm looking at all three of us. It's our fault. It's our fault. We are around other brothers. We are in education. We're talking to different people. It's our fault. We haven't picked up the mantle. We haven't said, hey, look, let's go out here and let's go pound the pavement. We're not in a whole bunch of community organizations. I know I'm not in a whole bunch of community organizations to where I can be helping out during the midterm elections. So a lot of this stuff is like Michael Jackson said, gotta look at the man in the mirror.
And that's why we started. One of the reasons why I wanted to do this was to start voicing these types of things. So I think we're on the right track though right now.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's been an interesting discussion, man.
Oh yeah, most definitely.
I definitely appreciate you guys as always. So we want to thank you all for watching. We definitely appreciate it. If you like the content, we definitely would love for you to subscribe, and we love comments as well. So we thank you again, and peace out.